this morning with Eric Epler from PennLive.com, and we're talking this morning about the PIAA. Eric has been on top of this for a good long time. Brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Eric, good morning.
Good morning, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you with us here today. Like I said, you've been following the PIAA for 60, 70, 80 years now. So
it feels that way.
Yeah. Just 2020 feels like 80 years, I know. You were in on the Zoom meeting yesterday, watching the deliberative process of the PIAA, and they came out with the guidelines for fall sports. What surprised you, if anything, about their decision-making yesterday?
Well, I think the biggest thing that came out of it, most of the rules that they're following from the Commonwealth were intact. What was interesting to me was the hybrid start. The PIAA has been sort of adamant here over the past 6 weeks of moving forward, barring an outbreak of COVID in certain pockets or certain counties of Pennsylvania. They've been pretty adamant about trying to start on time because, basically, why not try to get as much as we can in now? Because there's really no guarantee that down the road looks any better. Things were floated out there about flipping football to the spring and the logistical nightmare that would be. But getting started was so valuable in this process. So to offer the kind of hybrid start to the season, a lot of administrators, the PIAA heard from coaches about sort of coinciding the start of competition with the start of actually bringing kids in and the start of school.
Yeah.
So the hybrid start thing was was a different twist that was not really expected, but I think it's a positive. It basically says if programs or districts want to start 2 weeks later, they're absolutely able to do that because we know as well as most that the regular season is going to be very, very flexible. Mm-hmm. There are going to be times where, scheduled games are not going to be able to be played due to maybe a positive test on one team or possibly a team quarantine because of a positive test from a player or coach. So having that flexibility to start later than the proposed first start date was the big thing for me.
That word flexible is not traditionally associated with the PIAA in any way, shape, or form.
Exactly.
So for them to make that concession, it really was a big deal, wasn't it?
It was because, like I said, they have been fueling everything for this August 10th start week for football, the Heat acclimation period that was designated years ago for football. August 17th was the first start of practice. That will not change, but if teams want to begin actual competitions 2 weeks later, there's the flexibility to do that. So I think that helped a lot of districts who are contemplating whether or not to bring kids in, quote unquote, on time, or to maybe even set up the virtual classroom to continue that process, which I know has been a bear for some school districts. To offer that option to parents, at least for the interim, not only just maybe for the first semester or first half of the school year, but a lot of schools have gone to this hybrid where you can start virtually if you or your parents believe that it's a safety issue. You want your kid at home learning virtually for the first 4 or 5 weeks and then revert into high schools. That option's out there too. So I think to set all that up for schools has been a bear, and it's still ongoing.
Yeah, well, that ongoing nature is really interesting to me, how fluid this situation is, how dependent it is upon something that is so unknown, which is the way the state health department is going to act on any given day. And you could sort of sense the frustration in Bob Lombardi when he was talking about the spectator issue.
Yeah, the spectator issue actually got a lot of play, as you can imagine, on Twitter. The PIAA has really worked hard to follow every single organization and every single rule from the Commonwealth, from the Wolf Administration, Department of Health, CDC. They've gone through their strategic planning committees, their sports medicine advisory committee, individual steering committees, and even gotten notes from the Pennsylvania State Football Coaches Association, and the National Federation. So to kind of incorporate all of those to come up with a plan is pretty remarkable. And the idea that there are things in this that obviously parents, the loss of spectators, at least initially, is an issue, is a hot button issue. And there's other things too that when you're trying to mold or sort of mix all of these guidelines and all of these recommendations together, there's going to be parts about it people don't like. So, but I thought they did a bang-up job. I mean, I know it's 24 pages. It's a lot to digest when you're talking about 8 different fall sports. But it's pretty remarkable on what they've come up with.
I thought I thought as well it was interesting, and I don't know how subtle it was that the cancellation of the basketball season coming as abruptly as it did, and the lessons learned from that seemed to have played a role in the way these guidelines were developed as well. Did you not think that?
I thought so. Yeah, I think realistically, I believe that at this point, the PIAA believed at this point, the end of the month, end of July, with 1 month to go, that some of these restrictions and stuff would be relaxed at this point. And I know, obviously, they're still hoping that will happen. But yeah, the end of last year was so abrupt and sort of so not out of character is not the right term, but just so unfamiliar to anything that we've seen, at least in my lifetime. And then to lose the spring was even worse. So they've been working pretty diligently since March. March 12th, I believe, is when they first suspended the basketball tournament. And, everybody believed that, we'll come back in 2 weeks. Well, 2 weeks is now turned into 5 months. Mm-hmm. And everybody's eager to get back onto the field. So, yeah, I think they learned a lot from that, stretch, that weird stretch in our sports world.
Yeah, I think the development of this 24-page document is really an interesting thing as well, because you're right, they broke it down sport by sport, and there are some specific things to each of those sports that have to be given really careful consideration, and maybe consideration of factors that we're, as a general public, not even aware.
Yeah, there's things that happened before. It could be something as, something as overlooked as the pregame, how the pregame between the officials, coaches, and maybe captains are conducted. They're usually conducted near the official scorers table. Well, now that's not going to happen. Now the official scorers table, which is going to be less people allowed, only the host team can have their timer there and their scorekeeper there. They got to be 6 feet apart. And, traditionally that would be a sort of very hot area where media linger. I've lingered around scoring tables all my life.
Yeah, me too.
Coaches and even players who are either, sitting for 2 minutes on a penalty, excuse me, and, certain assistant coaches and things like that. So little things like that are going to have to change. And I'm guessing the aftermath is going to continue. It's basically going to be this way for an extended years, in my opinion.
I'm thinking we're going to hear the word "whoops" a lot in the fall season.
Yeah, well, just looking at football and what they're going to have to do. There's one thing to reduce rosters to kind of limit how many kids or how many athletes are on the sidelines. But you've been to football games. Sidelines on a football game is like, I don't know. It's like they're handing out free buffets. There's hundreds of people, between the chain gang and the officials and the ball boys and the players and trainers and assistant coaches. There's so many people. So to extend that, one of the rules now, or one of the recommendations, is to extend that sideline now to the 10-yard lines where players could actually stay. And like I mentioned, the reduced roster. So just little things like that are going to be plaguing assistant coaches. Assistant coaches are really going to have to become more get-back coaches.
Yeah.
The get-back coach from pro football and college football. Assistant coaches are going to have to wear a lot of different hats here and basically be, pseudo policemen on sidelines and in practice and things like that, just to make sure we could, quote unquote, social distance and just keep everybody in a safe sort of bubble.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out as well that the game officials themselves are not going to be the arbiters of the social distancing, physical distancing, or any of those things. Those are the school district's responsibilities. The officials are going to pay attention to the game itself. I thought, just looking at some of the other sports, for instance, one of the rules for tennis, to pass the ball to the opponent, you do it with your racket or with your foot, and you don't do it by tossing it to them with your hand. But on your serve, you're tossing the ball in the air with what? Your hand.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It is so difficult, but they really went committee by committee and really examined what happens in each sport.
Yeah, exactly. And they were talking about, you mentioned tennis, about, starting your game, you have two cans of tennis balls that you're to use, and check the even numbers on the balls and things like that. Just anything to try to limit the exposure. I know. Tennis players are constantly, it's a hard sport, it's a grinding sport. You're constantly wiping your forehead, you're constantly touching your face and wiping sweat away from your face. So, can you figure out a way to get it in your mind that, okay, I'm going to do it this way, I'm going to wear more sweatbands, things like that. I mean, it's just, the logistics behind continuing seem impossible, that you can remember everything, coaches can administer everything and watch everything. But you're right about officials. They can't have the burden of making sure all of this is happening on the sidelines when they need to be focused on the game. So, yeah, you're right. It's going to be different for a lot of people and a lot of the athletes. I mean, they're going to have to get used to things that they just simply won't like.
We're going to have Melissa Mertz from the PIAA on with us in our next half hour. Eric Epler, we need to get in touch with you again and talk with you more on this high school sports issue, and with your permission, we'll go ahead and do that. Is that okay by you?
Absolutely, Todd. Anytime. Glad to help.
Terrific. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thanks, Todd. You too.
There's Eric Epler from PennLive.com. It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160. AM 1160.